Reinstein. Good evening. I know it's the afternoon, but it's such a great day that I thought I'd better say something that recognizes the fact that all of you were very brave to go in this weather. Now, if you thought that this was a very orderly organization by the orderly way Lou introduced me, it isn't. I'm beginning with violating 2 rules right off the bat. For these classes, not in general, I'm not that undisciplined. It is supposed to start with what is in the headlines today. And only at the very end, therefore, you will supposed to also have, since it's both journalism and philosophy, a 2-piece, only 2 pages, on which you analyze one thing that you want to contribute to the paper at once. Okay, I decided to start with what isn't in the headline and to read it, therefore, at the very beginning. And the reason I decided that is because this particular thing, Lesotho coup, really will show you why it is so indispensable for revolution to have a philosophy of revolution. Without that, it's a coup. And that this particular coup will show up the Reagan administration, all the counter-revolutionaries from in the South Africa, in Latin America, that American imperialism is supporting, and will let us see why the method makes you see what is not in the headlines, and it's just a little thing, something. So let me read this. Lesotho, Ronald Reagan's rolling out the red carpet for Jonas Savimbi, that Angolan mercenary leader supported by South Africa, it may appear to have no connection with the coup in the tiny, faraway country, Lesotho. The truth, however, is that what characterizes apartheid South Africa, the visage of Hitler, pervades all capitalist regimes in post-WW2 world. Will you get me some water, please? And is inseparable from the 5 years of rule by Ronald Reagan. The history of the Ronald Reagan administration proves an unbroken continuity of Reagan's retrogressionism, motivated by his vision of the final war that he keeps U.S. nuclearly armed and reaching for the skies. This threat to humanity's very survival does not stop Reagan. Here is the record of Reagan's relationship with apartheid South Africa. He no sooner got into the White House, 1981, than he quietly invited the Chief of Staff for Intelligence of the South African Defense Force to visit the United States. 2 months later, this was followed by open official visit by South Africa's foreign minister. No more than 3 months were needed to reveal what strategic philosophy, pardon me for calling it philosophy, it's in quotation marks, Reagan devised as he pontificated on what he called constructive engagement. The following year, the administration worked mightily to get the IMF to approve a loan of $1 1/10 billion to prop up South Africa's apartheid economy. Reagan's constructive engagement these years led him to send a high official to Austria to meet Botha's foreign minister and announce its success. You'll have to pardon my throat. By premature sending a half to Austria to meet Botha's foreign minister and announce its success, by prematurely predicting that everyone will soon see what a reformist Botha is in the address he was to deliver to his parliament. Instead, that address further expanded Botha's apartheid with the emergency special emergency martial legislation and took time out to slap Reagan's face by wondering at the gall of the United States for interfering in South Africa's internal affairs. Nothing, however, neither the slap in the face nor the undeclared civil war of that savage armed regime against the unarmed black majority would turn Reagan away from his so-called constructive engagement. On the contrary, no sooner had apartheid South Africa engineered the coup in Lesotho, lifted its embargo to that country, as Reagan in other words, as the new Lesotho puppet had put all African National Congress refugees on a plane out of Lesotho, then the red carpet was rolled out for Jonas Savimbi, who has been South Africa's stalking horse the whole Southern Africa continent. While no one doubts either who Savimbi is or that South Africa engineered the coup in Lesotho, few in the United States see either the connection of the two with the Reagan administration that in preparing to aid mercenary, unacceptable creature, with Savimbi's invitation to the White House and his speech to the Heritage Foundation, the lobbying for that aid has already begun. Instead of being under the illusion that Congress will not vote for military support to the likes of Savimbi and renaming the mercenary a freedom fighter, just remember this. Congress's repeal of the Clark Amendment on military aid being forbidden without the consent of Congress. This was soon followed by renaming military aid, insofar as Latin American counter-revolution was concerned, humanitarian aid in the case of Nicaragua, even though it was to overthrow the legitimate revolutionary government there. All a mercenary army has to do to get aid from the Reagan industry, be it in Latin America or Southern Africa or the Middle East or Asia, is say we are anti-communist. In a word, Reagan's close relationship to apartheid South Africa has priority over all else, be it Savimbi, who's trying to overthrow Angola, or the other mercenaries who are aiming at the same barbaric aim, I guess, I shouldn't have said aim twice, to overthrow the legitimate revolutionary government in Mozambique, or the Lesotho coup. Reagan is ready and with his anti-communist rhetoric. And who, pray, are the communists in Lesotho? Now, whoever is the managing, I can write 2 pages. People have begun to think that I can't write anything less than 25 pages. But now, when you get to the headlines, it is important to see both the headline itself and why I didn't start with that. Because who can possibly think it's a surprise that in the Philippines it was that horror, Marcos, who won, not even Reagan. He tried to pretend that he will be surprised and therefore he'll follow. But it turned out that, in fact, even his most conservative of the same Heritage Foundation that paved the way for Savimbi to be invited here and also is now lobbying for aid to that freedom fighter, said the vote is so fraudulent that all we're going to do by inviting and propping up Marcos any further is the same fate that befell us when we propped up the Shah. And that is absolutely true. So what actually has to be seen is not the headline, but what is the absolute opposite of that man who now rules and has ruled. And in a certain sense, even though Reagan is the worst of all we've had, and its continued retrogression. The truth of the matter is that the United States was imperialist with the very birth of the Philippines. After all, what had occurred there was the people wanted freedom from Spain, yes? And they had a revolution, and they overthrew the Spanish government, or thought they did. America came in to help them be independent, and ever since we've done nothing but betray that country's aim. So the point in all cases is to see what is involved in a certain headline, in a certain event, that whether you know it or not, you dialectically do look at these two opposites. The point is how to resolve that contradiction. And the opposites are that each country has two worlds, that of the masses and that of the rulers. And it is that fact that is forcing even someone as non-dialectical but very, very doctrinaire in the reactionary sense, Reagan. So what do you suppose he will now, dig out from the sudden philosophic approach of Weinberger? We really have them. Called the Defense Secretary, but he should be called Minister of War. That Minister of War has a 336-page annual report he just handed to Congress. It's all on the budget and how much there is. And in there he says that people do not really understand why we are, well, he doesn't put that word in, they're cutting to the bone all social programs. They're moving backward on every single point, whether it's black, Latino, or any other, and we do have representatives and people living here from all the other countries. Supposedly he's for East Europe, but only because he thinks that since they're against communism, he can't see a left of communism at all. Okay, he came up, Weinberger I'm talking about, with a new philosophy. He says conceptual arsenal. Now, isn't that funny? Even when he gets to philosophy, he can't get away from militarization. Even the reporter, he's just an ordinary bourgeois reporter, probably liberal, has titled the analysis of the budget where the aid for, the money, the deficits and so forth, for Star Wars has been doubled, while all social programs have been cut to the bone. He says, pass the ammunition. And that's what he's passing. If he calls it intellectual, he'll fool nobody but himself. Now, why should someone like Weinberger or Reagan or the whole bunch of them, also in the media, who so often just whitewash this administration, suddenly go to philosophy or pretend to be for philosophy? It is precisely because the absolute opposite, the masses, whether they're working class, that's the main one, whether they're black, whether they're Latino, whether they're Middle East, whether they're anything, because each country has these two different worlds, are so anxious that all the unfinished revolutions finally stop, and they should have one that succeeds, that brings totally new human relations. And in order for that to happen, they have a passion for a philosophy of revolution that would be inseparable for the actual revolution, so that they would achieve this new human relation. And that is so not only prominent, but you know, everyone feels that no matter what kind of homilies they keep saying, like and I think we will see that in another, so to speak, headline, because they certainly tried to play it down, especially Reagan. Just look at the explosion, the Challenger explosion, which had led us to change the lead. In other words, we have it also on page 1. Lou was very modest. He didn't say that he also will speak today, sometime as soon as the discussion gets going. And on this terrific pamphlet, which he had a lot to do with, in addition to being co-author, because we don't separate the technical from the philosophic either. And remember the trauma of seeing that ball of fire into the sky, and what happened to the people. The 7 astronauts, they brought something new. A fiery crucifixion. Crucifixion, you know, is bad enough. No, this was in the air, far away. And the death, or the agonized faces of all the people who watched, or the weeping faces, and believe me, it wasn't only relatives, even though they mentioned relatives, stopped Reagan for 1 minute before he rushed to say the shuttle must go on, and will go on. The other point was, oh, it had nothing to do with Star Wars. And what do you suppose the shuttles were so hurried? Now, I can't go into the details that you will read in the good lead that we had now. You know, it's just gone to press, the paper. But I do want to go into the ramifications of the question of science and life. You see, you may think that, well, certainly nothing is newer, and even the other 7 had it. We had this terrific trauma, and Reagan is going on as if science is perfect. What did it prove in addition to this fiery crucifixion of human beings? Science's unpredictability. It isn't just you now. We can now put on a bunch of computers and they will do everything. And all that love of artificial intelligence. Now you say, I mean they say, oh, of course, artificial intelligence can only do what a human being programs them to do. But what do they actually work and try to realize? And that is to always find some human error. But that human error was caused by what? The Pentagon domination of science, and saying, oh, we must have so many in such and such a little time, and never mind looking for all the things that might happen. The computers will do it all. Okay, now think instead all the way back to 1844, when Marx first announced his philosophy and called it a new humanism. That's 1844. And what was this new humanism relationship to science? It was nowhere as advanced as ours. To have one basis for life and another one for science is a priori a lie. And this same new humanism, even when he called it communism and then called it First Working Men's International and so forth, the name, in other words, didn't matter, was reiterated, re-articulated after 40 years of working on all the economic laws of capitalism and so forth, to discover that the pre-capitalist society, this new science then, anthropology, in other words, ancient society by Lewis, had revealed the role of women. Way back, he was talking about the Iroquois. having much more freedom and decision-making power than the women in the modern, beautiful, industrialized Western Europe. And the Irish women had more freedom before imperialism came in than they had after. And he went through all of the countries that were summarized in those things, including the Aborigines. In other words, that there has to be a relationship of what was the course of human development and how should it relate to the technology and so forth in such a way that it's life and science are not two separate areas. Now, it is this passion for philosophy and this concretization of it in each specific historic period that is really the point of why we are trying to say that something that sounds so simple, except we have no money, to transform ourselves from a monthly to a bi-weekly is what we need these classes for, where the audience is as important. And in fact, none except the first one is going to be that lengthy for you, to actually discussing the current events and see whether they want to contribute something or tell their story, whether it is current or not, that directly relates to how we shape this world and what is the relationship between a current event and what you aim for, which seems to be in the distant future but shouldn't be distant, should actually become reality. Now, the same thing is true when you go to other points in the, today's New York Times or even the horrible strike-breaking effect, the Chicago Tribune. And they've been talking about that for a long time, and that returns us back to the big, beautiful Geneva Summit that's supposed to have said so many right things. That nothingness, which was supposed to have drawn fundamental relations between the two powers, the two poles of capital, each wanting to have single domination of the world. But for a second, they decided, gee, they really can't yet start a nuclear war. They're not prepared. So they're going to have some cultural exchange or some stupid thing. But meanwhile, Gorbachev seems to be dragging his feet to set a precise date of when the second meeting will hold. So here are our great big, thinkers or opinion makers or whatever they consider themselves, telling us that the reason is that Gorbachev is a new man and he's done so many changes in the at the top and removed the generation of 70s and 80s and put in some who are actually as young as 60 years old. I mean, that's supposed to be very young. Hasn't got the vote. See, that's what he's always looking for. What is the vote? I have news for you. It has nothing to do with the vote. Believe me, he has the vote. And they don't have to wait for February 25th. The reason I can tell you 9 days in advance of the even meeting what it will do is, first of all, the draft was published in October. I mean, what is this? You really think there'll be a great big change between the draft and the final thing? And the draft tries to show that there is continuity, even though he's doing all that criticism and discontinuity from all these bureaucrats before. Everybody's a bureaucrat except he. So, a real program that starts something apical was made in Russia in 1903 when they made the Vanguard Party. And it was changed fundamentally, totally, and so forth in 1919 when they had a real revolution. So all the time of the transformation into total opposite from a worker state into a state capitalist society, or the Stalinist period, never dared to say that they're doing a new program. It was always they're up to date. In other words, supposedly they were just updating each time. Okay. The one who did call it new was Khrushchev. And that he wanted you to forget the Stalin era as if he wasn't the protege of that by, definitely doing a few good things or something, taking some of the people out of prison, not too many, and stuff like that. So that 1961 program expounded the new. You know what the new was? Peaceful coexistence. It's not that Stalin, you see, didn't practice it, for heaven's sakes. He had the Hitler-Stalin pact that started World War II. But he had turned against it once Hitler invaded Russia. Anyway, peaceful coexistence is the one that they are now separating. And I want to show you two things why philosophy is so important. This is our first big theoretical work, the one that announced that we are not just a tendency of what is, we're as Marxists, but we are pronouncing that we are Marxist-Humanists, and that world concept both brings us back to Marxism, and at the same time makes it for our age and our country, and therefore you can see that freedom, the struggle for freedom, started before Marx, in other words, 1776. And 1776 had to have a civil war before it ever showed that it really meant freedom. In other words, the abolitionist movement with the black dimension is very crucial, and the abolitionists in general. Okay, in that, we not only say what was, but begin our own age. In other words, there is a full proof, economics and statistics and all that, of what we mean by the transformation into opposite and what happened in Russia from the time it was Soviet and revolutionary to the time that it had the Hitler-Stalin pact. In fact, I bring it up, to the outbreak of World War II. I'm forgetting now the age. Okay, 4 years before this 1961 program, Khrushchev was had engineered to finally speed the death of Stalin in a hurry. He was already in bed, but nobody could quite end it. And the question was, what does this mean now that he has brought in some changes? And will it really be different because it's more modern, advanced, and so forth? So those of you who have the book, it's page 254, one sense from that, and 255 the other. The fundamental error of those who assume that a single capitalist society is not governed by the same laws as a society composed of individual private property-owning capitalists lies in a failure to realize that what happens in the market is not the cause, but the consequence of the inherent contradictions of the process of production. Our single capitalist society has achieved some highly modern factories, a showy subway, and as Khrushchev assures us, an H-bomb big enough so that if he dropped it over the polar ice caps, it would flood the world. But it has not stopped to raise the living standard of the masses of Russian workers. It cannot. Capital, state capitalism, will not allow it. Because of this, the economy is in constant crisis. Now, that is what they were saying in the 60s, not they were saying it, I interpreted what they would say 4 years later, that they cannot possibly do anything else because, after all, America also has the H-bomb and better. And for this competition, how much do we hear all for the competition that you have to give all those concessions? We have to obey the world market and so forth. Therefore, not the those who have the money and who have it. What is it? It's the unpaid hours of labor you give. That's what it is. Should do the sacrifices and not that. Now, you know, there's one other thing in relationship to this Gorbachev. Incidentally, what he does want to have approved is not only that the discipline of labor discipline will continue and be more in the factory, but that he can play around on the international scene and see what new alliances might help him. And it wouldn't be anything like Hitler, Stalin, but maybe with Japan, maybe with someone else. What about China? How did the Sino-Soviet orbit become a Sino-Soviet conflict? He wants to try in every single part where either Khrushchev failed or this wasn't the time. Okay, the other, maybe it isn't in the headline now. Oh, yes, it was yesterday. It was, as a matter of fact. They got very worried, they meaning the Reagan administration, over the Japan's announcement that now, mind you, in order to be ready to help the United States if they're attacked in the Pacific, he was going to have some build-up of the Navy. And that is supposedly not contrary to their own constitution that says they should not be a military power any longer, because it is to help the United States. The point is that the United States knows one other thing, and that is that, oh, I guess you'll have to put up some more chairs. And that is that 10 days ago, what was it? I don't remember, 15 to the 19th. Well, you can count, I'm very poor in counting. Shevardnadze visited Japan, and he made lots of contracts, better ones than the ones he made with Reagan, I forgot his name. In other words, it's mostly cultural and very little trade, but there was lots of trade with Japan. Number one, they're going to get something like 4 extra food factories or something. Number two, they're going to get some technology. Number three, they are jointly, that has been several years now and it fell through, but this time they said they really will, build up Eastern Siberia. Now, that's a country I do know a lot of. Believe me, it isn't an overnight job. So some of both the big shots and the little sailors who got it with the kamikazes saying, oh my God, if the Japanese military gets going again and those ships are all over, yes, it's going to be a Pacific war, not only an Atlantic war, but we're not very sure where it's going to go in the Pacific. So you see, the fact of the delay has to do with what Khrushchev wants to know in the 27th Congress of the Russian Communist Party, which will be meeting February 25th, how much he has achieved in the few months he's been in power in relationship both to China in general. He's trying to make it some stuff. Believe me, they won't give up the army that's on the Chinese border. But they want to assure that China is not going to be in the final alliance with the United States. So the draft program is full of how awful, not the relationship of Russia to the United States, but how awful America is in relationship to Latin America. It's far enough away from Russia so they they think they can really expose America. Okay. It has a lot of mass struggles so long as they're not in Russia. They're suddenly for them. If it's in the opposite country, just like America's for it if it's in Poland. In the hope that it means they will have access. Now, you know, this is very peculiar. Reagan has said there are 16, what does he call them? Choke points. Now, incidentally, how do you choke an ocean? I don't know. But these are all the oceans and critical points, whether it's the Middle East and so forth, with all the stars you see. You'll be very, very smart when you read it through. Also, you better know that your wages will be less, and your education will be less, and the youth won't count either unless they join the army. And the science is going to be what they say it is. That is, the aim is going to be for militarization, for preparing for this nuclear war, for trying to fool us that a nuclear war is winnable. Okay, now how or what is meant by pointing out whether it's historical focal points or the ones that are really brought out? In other words, whether it's those that weren't in the headlines, like the Lesotho coup, whether it's those that are in the headlines, like the Philippines and the summit of Russia and the United States, where the point was that there are two worlds in each country, and that the aim of both, whether it's private capitalism or calls itself that, or it's state capitalism as in Russia, and it's plenty state here when it comes to the war, in fact 100%. So it isn't that it is there, but it is back to what I was talking about, Marxism, whether it was in 1844, and he first called his philosophy a new humanism, whether it had to do with peasants or with women or with blacks or with all the other minorities, and Russia had more than anyone else, even us. Believe me, I know those, and I know what they do was the minority. And what it is that philosophy helps you determine and why you should want to work with that so that the philosophy of revolution and revolution unite. Okay, take the word totality. You see, we've now, as I said, whether you mention 16 points or you mention only 4 or 5 points, you do try to look what's happening everywhere. But what you must see as a dialectician is that totality is not a sum total, a quantitative measure. That totality, like each individual point, is a whole unto itself in the sense that of the relationships, not the quantity. What are the relationships of classes? What are the relationships of sexes? What are the relationships of youth to adult? And it's these human relations that shape and reshape society, not necessarily in the sense of, you know, out of whole cloth. No, you're set by history and you're set by the fact of what had been done before. So the point with totality, if you're a dialectician and if you're a Marxist, and that's what you want to study is Marxism, is to see that what Marx calls history in the making. In other words, how and when and at which historic turning point and under what circumstances do people finally have a chance to reshape it in some way, and what will be the final way of having truly human relations. In other words, the course of human history was fourfold. At first he used to say only threefold. In other words, slavery, capitalism, feudalism and capitalism. They said, oh no, he now sees that pre-capitalism, or what he called the Oriental Commune, but he didn't mean a geographic designation either. Because as a matter of fact, he mentioned his own little country. He said, I remember as a child that he was passing the ghetto, and in the ghetto, says, oh, these are backward people. I mean, his daddy told him. He says, oh my God, that must have been what was still left from the Celtic commune. So it was the Russian, it was the Oriental, it was the American Indians, or it was the question of the Aborigines in Australia. Whatever country there was, you could see that there had been in other forms. So that's when he put in 4. Okay, but that too had a relationship. What does it mean when you add the fact, you recognize the importance of the fact of pre-capitalism? Against it is the question of multilinearism, which is what Marx expressed in the new moments that connected with the first moment in his last decade, and why we call the 1880s a trail to the 1980s. It was the fact that these particular forms, even though they show greater freedom in some respects, were not really greater. In other words, industrialism was necessary in the, so to speak, final run or in future. The point is, what relationship will that have, the advanced country to the backward country once you have a revolution? So the new, the great, the final thing was what? This is 1882, mind you. Revolution may come first in the backward country. Russia was backward, as against his technologically advanced, great and so forth, Germany and West Europe. But don't go from that to what his greatest collaborator, and who didn't understand the new community, as if that is the communal universal form, unilinearism. All we have to do is put some Frigidaires or thing in the old society, and we'll all be ready to be that. No, it's a reorganization. In other words, what Hegel, the dialectic is, you begin with the opposites, the contradiction and so forth. But that's only the first opposite, to recognize that there is a contradiction in all human development and capitalist and labor and so forth. Okay. Then you go through whether it's a synthesis or a further contradiction. It isn't, so to speak, the one that is the final, the second negativity, the negation of the negation. Now that strange word, Marx had a good interpretation for it. Revolution in permanence. So we have to see now how Hegel abstractly defines this absolute method, and how Marx, well, Lenin did in 1917 anyway, for one little period, did it in his age, and why we call that a trail to there. Now, I seem to have brought all the old editions instead of the new, in this case, because I wanted to show you not only the first time we proclaimed humanism in the United States, that is the struggle for it, was the 1957 edition also, because that is the only edition that has the first translation, my first translation, of Marxist humanist essays and Lenin's philosophic notebooks. Now, in order to be able to take advantage of the new, in the 60s from their point of view. In other words, the challenge of Mao Zedong that this isn't communism. He finally decided it was state capitalism, but not his. There was the challenge of Mao Zedong. Is that really new, or is that just a new national revolution as against Russia? At any rate, now I have the Philosophy and Revolution, the 73 book, and that's what takes up all of Hegel's important works. And I have the quotation here that I'm, on the threshold of the absolute idea. Hegel defines what is it that he means, or what has resulted from the flow of things, but between at the point when cognition, thought in other words, and practical ideas unite. So you think you've got it, right? You're right in the absolute idea. He warns you that this unity, that will also be the first unity, not the second. Not, however, in other words, not because as an inquiring cognition, rely a subjective world without the subjectivity of the notion. In other words, the concept, the idea, the philosophy, the human being in it, the subjectivity of the notion. In fact, at that point, and Lenin caught it, suddenly Hegel was using the word subject, not notion. But a subjective world whose inner ground and actual persistence is the notion, is the concept. Okay. Now, don't forget that I had analyzed the major works of Hegel in Philosophy and Revolution at the time when we were very great in the United States with the 60s revolution, when we thought we'd really get onto there. And all the new passions and new forces of society from the 60s and early 70s, I was summarizing in the chapter 9, in other words, the final chapter, relating these abstractions to that. And what I said there was, it was, in other words, during this period of revolutionary agitation, it was as if Hegel's absolute method as a simultaneously subjective, objective mediation had taken on flesh, both in life and in cognition. Subjectivity, live men and women, tried shaping history by a totally new relationship of practice to theory. Now that is what we are concerned with in ever new stages, whatever it is that the objective situation demands and what we think. Now, as it happens with this trauma of the I think you'll have to do something. Of the nuclear explosion, the fact of why it is that we so much felt the compulsion to have quicker responses. It's not exactly we're going to have a daily, but we at least want the bi-weekly. And for that, you are very important as to how you will participate in this discussion, how you will try and influence the making and the preparation for the bi-weekly by your actual contributions and writing and analysis, so that in all times what we are concerned with in this method is that there is a relationship between journalism and philosophy and action, such that we become actual participants in and try to develop a way that the action is not separate from there and all towards totally new human relations. Now, one thing that I didn't take up, not only that I gave over to the lead, so to speak, said they should take up, is this. new expanded edition of Frantz Fanon, Soweto, and American Black Thought. You see, the black dimension, this is not, it's rough. In other words, you'll have to wait, what, how many days?
February 24th.
February 24th, it'll be a book, and you can have it. And I didn't go in as far into the black dimension as I would have if it weren't for the fact that the co-author of this book will take the floor, not immediately after me, but soon thereafter, and will deal with this factor, which shows that it isn't only this particular thing or Lesotho, even though the South Africa is very, very crucial. I mean, there is an undeclared civil war that's still going on, and we have a lot to do with how we help them do that. So that in this thing, there will be a connection and a further development of an actual struggle that is at the same time one that doesn't end the day after. And it is towards that I want to invite everyone to try to both give their own experiences or their own thoughts and see that that becomes part of this first talk that we gave, and will continue 6 more weeks or 5 more weeks.
Okay, at this point we want to have, I had the fortune of having a chance to talk with my co-speaker here for this class yesterday, and that I was supposed to give the sub-report, and we went over how we wanted to break that down and present today's discussion. And while one of the things that I will definitely talk about very briefly, and hopefully will be provocative enough to be able to invite people back to a fuller discussion of it when it's off the press in the coming period, will be the Frantz Fanon, Soweto, and American Black Thought expanded edition of this pamphlet. What I wanted to begin with actually begins right here in Chicago. And Raya was helpful enough because when you look at the next issue of News and Letters, which Eugene was just talking about, the March issue, you'll see is the lead, the article on the Challenger and how science, scientism under capitalism in general, but under Reagan in particular, has definitely gone wild. Next to it will be, or on the same page will be, the Black World column that I'll be writing on the state of Black America. For us, in News and Letters, this certainly when we talk about two worlds, that has been throughout our history one of the two things that we've held tightly in tow, how capitalism and its technology in the U.S. has predominated on the one hand, or has tried to so predominate as to think that it is almighty, while on the other hand, the conditions, the pauperization of the other America is bringing forth as well new subjects of revolution. Certainly, many of us experienced that in the 60s and 70s. But right here in Chicago, Chicagoland, as they call it, I'd like to welcome everybody to what the economists and all the commentators now call the Rust Belt. You've heard of the Sun Belt and everything else, but now they call this area of the Midwest the Rust Belt, and certainly Chicago is one of the commercial and industrial centers of it. And in talking about this Rust Belt, this article in a local newspaper here talks about it being nothing less than a rebirth economically, and indeed calls it a new economic boom. An economic boom which glows, it says, brightest in the suburbs, glows brightest even in the Loop, grows brightest even in the outlying regions of Indiana, but never, however, glows at all in the southeast area where the steel mills are shut down, and in particular in the black neighborhoods in Chicago, in the ghetto, in the cities. So even here, the bourgeois ideologues, whose the most immediate expression is through their newspapers, talk about and try to extol Reagan's recovery, which he was talking about so thematically, as his speechwriters say, in his State of the Union. He didn't want to go into specifics. He would hand in his budget the next day and let the budget speak for itself. Of course, that was where all the real action was happening in the budget, because for the 6th year in a row, this man is calling for, and unfortunately we have a Congress who will go along with it, cutbacks in all social programs across the board and an ever-expanding military budget. And this idea of Weinberger's conceptual arsenal is really the real name for what Reagan is doing. It's a conceptual arsenal, which isn't alone Reagan wants to pose against the threat from outside. It's the conceptual arsenal of Reagan's budget that he's directed and aimed very coldly at the poor and working class in this country. So that's more or less my takeoff point for talking about a very different type of state of the Union, that is the state of Black America. Unfortunately, again, this year, I wrote about the state of Black America last year in the Black World column. There is another grim reality that we will have to look at as well, and that grim reality is that the black leadership, and in particular, in this case, the National Urban League, which puts out its own very hefty report on the state of Black America. We got an advanced copy of it here in the office. Talks about the state of Black America, which obviously Reagan does not take up, but you would think that they would do better than Mr. Reagan. I think it's unfortunate that the 2nd year in a row, the Urban League isn't doing much more than what is, so to speak, obvious. The state of Black America is worsening and worsening. Black America is ill-clothed, ill-housed, and the illness that people have throughout the black community is deeper and deeper and drawing people deeper in debt. Nevertheless, to bring the debate to a higher level about which way for Black America, because this is what the black leaders are talking about, the Urban League has opened its pages of this year's report to the new phenomena of the black conservative, so that at least half of the analyses written in the Urban League report is written by so-called black conservatives who want to convince you that affirmative action is out of step with what Black America needs, that civil rights is something that we can do without, and besides, Reagan's already rolling them back anyway, and that private entrepreneurship is what is the new direction for Black America. So unfortunately, when we look at Black America, we have to look at a very different type of subject and a very different type of direction. When we wrote this work in 1978, or published it in 1978, the South African struggle had risen as a very new stage in the black world, one which was not alone in activity, but certainly in the person of someone like Stephen Biko represented a new stage in black thought. 7 years later, we're putting out a new expanded edition of it, and really I just want to, since I certainly don't have the time to go in it here, I just want to talk about a few of the graphics, the pictures that I think show some of the new types of things we wanted to show in this new edition. The dedication is dedicated to the memory of Charles Demby and Stephen Biko, and at the very bottom you'll see that we wanted to issue it in February of this year for Black History Month. Charles Demby was the editor of our newspaper, as I mentioned earlier in the meeting, and in his autobiography, Indignant Heart, the very last chapter of it, he talked about the affinity of thought that Stephen Biko had caught between American black thought and the thinking, the philosophy of Frantz Fanon. So it was no accident that we wanted to bring all of these elements together. That is, a struggle like the one that initially arose in Soweto in 1976, and I think everybody here who's been active around the South Africa issue has seen that that issue, which began with school children, has now grown, developed into a full-scale struggle, where now the other picture I want to show you shows a very new stage. The very top picture is a picture of the working session of the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU. It's the new force. Some 500,000 black workers in South Africa have now formed a super union and are now very directly challenging Botha's apartheid government. Everyone knows that black labor is the core, the basis of apartheid's wealth, and that this new stage represented by labor, which we had caught originally back in 1976, has now determined, or is trying to determine, a new reality in that struggle and in that country. At that time, 1978, we were just on the verge of the new types of third world revolutions that we would see arise in 1979 in Nicaragua, in Grenada, in Iran. But now we've also seen, after 7 years, the fate of those new revolutions as well. And the context that is now created for that original work includes several new appendices that we wanted to add. One is a critique of negritude by a Haitian intellectual by the name and writer by the name of René Depeste. And it's his critique of negritude, not just negritude in the abstract, but his critique of negritude as a state ideology used by the Duvalier regime in Haiti for some 25 years, and just these last few weeks we've seen come to an end. Another appendix that we have in this issue is written by another writer, this time from Africa, the Kenyan writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o, on the politics of language and literature, which talks about the need to critique the state regimes in Africa as well, and that some of his writing has done that on a number of issues, including on African women. The last appendix, Appendix C, deals with what I think is very new, or what comes very new to this kind of triangular form that we had originally to the pamphlet. That is, Frantz Fanon as a Martinican, a Caribbean thinker and revolutionary whose thought is of a world dimension, Soweto representing Africa and American black thought. And that is, at that time, what was not concrete was the reality of the Grenada Revolution and what has come of it. That is, that while it is true Reagan had invaded, nevertheless the first shot of counter-revolution came from within the Revolutionary Party, and certainly the question of the party will cut across our discussions in these classes. So we have the critique written by Raya on Grenada, counter-revolution and revolution, the Caribbean today, and the challenge from 30 years of movements from practice that are themselves a form of theory. That's her critique of the revolutionary leadership in Grenada, an attempt to work out and return to the original source and principles of Marxist philosophy of revolution. And finally, as an afterward, we have the Marxist-Humanist perspectives for this coming period in this pamphlet to round out the whole of this new edition. Like I said, I won't be able to go into it today, but there are a number of very new features that are both shown in the new appendices and the very new type of introduction overview that we authored for this new edition, which links the triangular trade of ideas between Africa, the Caribbean, and the U.S. in black thought and in black activity for this period. Haiti is just on our shores, and John Allen, the co-author of Frantz Fanon's Sway on American Black Thought, devoted his column in the next issue of News and Letters to the events in Haiti, putting them not only in their international perspective as we see them today, but in their historical perspective, what Haiti had represented with the Haitian Revolution and the serious retrogression that there followed, and the need to have a totally new beginning and a new, very new relationship of theory to practice for in the black world in its drive to make revolution and to create a new human reality. Those are the things that I will be writing on. Some of the questions that some of us will be writing on, will continue to write on in News and Letters, and some of us will have a chance to project, to lecture on these in different parts of the country. So I hope that people will participate in some of those, and we'll have more information. As I mentioned, I hope people sign up for the mailing list, sign up on the mailing list to get information for those so we can have a more detailed discussion on this work and some of the activities that you're engaged in.
I know I will answer because I'm a Chicagoan. If you disregard Russian, I came here very early. So I consider myself a Chicagoan because my age would absolutely disprove everybody. So I have enough years in Chicago to also speak of that. And yet, my beginning of the answer to both sides of the Chicago debate will be what will sound very abstract, but be absolutely the most concrete. From the girl who, the woman who asked about philosophy to, you see how old I am? To the latest. And the word is revolution impermanent. And I want to explain that word because everybody thinks, well, it certainly means internationalism, not just one country. It certainly means many revolutions or something. So just to grapple with the word, my God, you mean after we've overthrown them, there's going to be another one? Gets everybody scared to death because they won't have the new society yet. No, he said, after you've overthrown its first negation, you have just overthrown it. You have so many, you the revolutionaries, the ones who did it, for heaven's sake, have so many prejudices, have been so brainwashed by the society it is, from language to class countries to anything, that you have no idea on how you have to reorganize yourself to have these new human relations. You have just set the ground where, because there will be no exploitation and so forth, and because there will be more than one revolution, that you would be able to begin. But think of that. How many things you say that you don't know you're saying? That's capitalistic. You've been a revolutionary, so to speak, all your life, and how could you possibly be capitalist? Well, Marx started with the simple word of Negro. He said, isn't this crazy? Why do you say Negro and mean slave, or say slave and mean Negro? Negro is black, Negro is Negro. There isn't a human being on earth who at one time or another has not been a slave. That was the development of humanity. But for you to try to categorize your slaves as if that is the same is just absolutely wrong. Now, you may think, gee whiz, he was a young man, and he was taking up language as if, you know, he knows language, is interested in the structure. When he, in his last decade, and what we call the new moment, when he discovered primitive society, he was reading an imperialist report on the Aborigines and saying how dumb they are. They're still animists. He was a priest. He was talking his heart out, trying to tell them about Christianity and how important it is to believe in only one God and so forth. And you couldn't move that guy. The guy says, the one who's interviewing, the dumb black who's an animist, says, what I want to know is, are you believing the Queen? You see, he's the British. He said, well, of course I believe in the Queen. Well, that's it. And Marx mentions the intelligent black put his hand right on the trouble. You see, in other words, it wasn't just language. We are reproducing two very important things on language in relationship to a Haitian and a Kenyan, and now whether you should use your own language or the imperialists that conquered you, and the intellectuals all knew the language of British or French and so forth. You know what was the most exciting thing to me when I was in Africa? I came into one, you know, so-called party or something. I don't know, it was the governor or some damn thing. And there was the French, there was the British, there was a third. I don't remember now what the third nationality was, was international thing. And they were all speaking, and I was thinking, oh my God, what are they speaking? I don't recognize any languages if the only Europeans have language. They were talking their tribal language. He said, that's the way we, meaning the blacks, could maintain our feeling, because we didn't have to know the other language, and whether we had to or didn't have to, this was the one that let us be with the people all the time. So here it is. I was ready to say, all kinds of things, how backward it is, tribes and all that sort of thing. But that was what had kept them revolutionary throughout the period of imperialism. Okay, now what is it that you can do individually in this dear old Chicago? Well, I'll tell you something about Chicago that you don't know. Long before that, I was present at the birth of the Negro Labor Congress and the Negro Champion, the first newspaper that was radical in way back in 1927. Well, the founding was actually 25, I don't remember. So, you see, in other words, it is natural that there is a part of history, the history in the making, that you don't know about, even though you're Chicagoan. What does community do to you? Your activity is correct, absolutely correct. You have to be active with that. But don't mistake community with what is a communal form that is a universal. In other words, why did Marx change his position? First call it New Humanism and then call it Communist League. Simple. That's the people who were revolutionary in that period. He said, well, if we're going to challenge the capitalists and so forth, they are the revolutionaries, and those I was with, who used humanism for, academia or something, or as if it's the study of humanities or not. Then he changed it back again. First Working Men's International. Why? Because the important thing was internationalism. Why was the important thing international? Because he had an idea about it? No, sir. There was a civil war going on in the United States. And that civil war, blacks and abolitionists, white, against the thing, and I don't mean Lincoln either, because Marx called him a pettifogging lawyer or something, but he did something, and that was necessary to support. And the workers of France and England and Germany, who were in London for a very special of their own reason, Union. The Napoleon and all that, they let them go to that. It was the first industrial exhibit in London, right? Okay, they were all supposed to be convinced on how great industrialism is. It's against what they are wondering for. And the British workers were starving, the textile workers, because the Civil War meant, that there was no traffic on cotton, which they were manufacturing, you see. And Britain intended to support the South and slavery, because they thought, boy, this time we're going to get the workers to really follow us. And the workers said, we'd rather starve than perpetuate slavery on the other side, and that would be blacklegging for us, right? And Marx said, well, this is one time when I'm going to be in that Congress and so forth, because we have to put down slavery. Okay, so it wasn't that he didn't participate, but he tried in each time to see what part of the population, what part of the working mass can he influence, or the other person who is almost like him can influence in a certain way. Each one tries to say, well, I can do it. For example, women's liberation, that's closer to you. It didn't start till the 70s. We were for it a long time before, right? Okay, and the women at first, some of the lesbians walked out on me. I wasn't opposed to lesbians, but just because I didn't want to make them the new heroines, and that they were the real women liberationists because they had no interest, whereas we would always be pulled by a lover or a husband or some damn thing, right? But we said, look, each one has a certain point to play, and you are interested in that, and it's absolutely correct, I'll support you. But I say for my organization, I want to concentrate on working, black, and philosophy. Now that's the 3 points I've given myself. I can't do everything. And the person who is also a humanist and is busy in the community work, yes, for heaven's sakes, be it. But don't expect everyone to be in it. On the contrary, you say, I will do what I can to talk about Washington. Okay. What about Washington? You know, I just was transferred from Detroit, and we had a right, so to speak, to think that there was nobody better. Geez, by this time I forgot his name. What is the name of him? Yeah, Coleman Young. Okay, I had more a right to think Coleman Young would be better than you had a right for Washington. You know why? I was actually on strike when the McCarthy committee came down, and at that time he was a communist, and I was opposed to communism, mind you, but not here. In other words, the Russian, because to me it's a state capitalist society. And the editor of our paper, Charles Denby, was in the same shop, and we went out on a strike because the McCarthy committee dared to accuse Washington of being a communist, and therefore he shouldn't work and all that sort of junk. In other words, yes, in action, you are with the person who is directly oppressed and directly related, whether it's black Americans, something like that. But to think that all your time has to be just with the community because the masses don't see what I see in a connection, those that will and will be attracted to what I'm, so to speak, selling, that's the ones I would want. Not because I don't want the others, but I have to take what really is the question. You see, when she says it isn't, absolutely, a lot of people knew he wouldn't make any difference. And now they want to know concretely. No, it cannot be spelled out in concrete form when you're limited to this city, to this election, and so forth. It's just impossible. What you can do at that time is say, yes, he has done such and such or will do, but the truth of the matter is there isn't going to be a fundamental change. And if you want really an entirely different new human relations society, let's go back to Haiti. That is in the headline. That is serious. That is something I know a good deal about, too. Not because I was alive to something over which I'm not that old. But I happen to have been related to the person who was analyzing it, you know, at that time it was from a Trotskyist point of view. Okay, and he shows great things as to what the first Haitian Revolution did, what Toussaint Louverture did. It was an extension of the French Revolution. He was saying, great, the phrase, well, now I want to have that type of freedom. And it was the only successful colonial revolution. So it's great to write a history of it, right? And now, why did I still object? Because I'm born contrary? That may be one reason, but no. I objected because at the end of that happened at the beginning of the 19th century, what the heck do you have to say of present? There was absolutely no relationship. That was the 1930s, which, you know, was already not exactly a free and wonderful country. Okay, why am I for René Desperce? He's probably a communist, for heaven's sake. Because he took up negritude, not what it was by the great negritude philosophers and Senghor and the others in France. was a good plaything. Well, he's happy that at one time or another the intellectual could shake some wives and say, oh, negritude is beautiful, black is beautiful. But for heaven's sakes, what did you have to say on the relations now? Here there was independence and so forth, whether it was in Senghor, Senegal, or in the others, and when they got into power, they were just every bit as bad. Look at Senghor, just a horror. So this, that Pestres shows that Haiti today, was 74 or something, I made her speak, was this dictatorship, this horrible. And how did he use negritude? What was really negritude that the intellectuals for them? Well, it was the peasantry, for heaven's sakes. The slaves, the ones who didn't really change much on the question after the Toussaint Louverture's revolution, right? And they had maintained in the farms a certain communal form, and even the Voodoo language, what is the relationship on religion, in such a way that the intellectuals made out, oh boys, now it shows you, because they had thought of their own as if that is something new, and they maintained it. But they left it only in the theoretic sphere. Okay. The point, therefore, is today, okay, I spoke, and my chairman was a Haitian professor, you know, an escape from one who escaped from Haiti, and was a professor there. Now that Haitian professor was on the one hand happy because he was writing something on Sartre, and I mean, you know, he was very active in the as a Haitian revolutionary still. But he already wanted to define that this is true, he let me speak, but the ones he really wants to work with, I have no idea whether it's communism or guerrilla war or something. But the point is this limitation of not seeing the multitude of views, of not relating the thing, and of just wanting the overthrow. So now it's overthrown. What the heck is going to happen? You have to understand that there is a world. There is a nuclear world. And this nuclear arsenal, or I mean, excuse me, intellectual arsenal, so it's supposed to be, conceptual arsenal, they will use that. So the point was that in the period before the overthrow, how you acted and whom you made your cadre or whatever you want to call them. And now that it's over, what is it you're going to do? No, I have no direct answers, but I do say that you cannot say, suddenly speak, so to speak, for the people who do not understand. There are plenty of people in Chicago who are hungering for something more than what they get either in Washington or in any of the tendencies they've had around. They're looking for those that really mean and practice in whatever little way they can, that the action is not separate from the philosophy, and the philosophy and action are not separate, for which you're really working for as a totally new human relationship. I'm sorry that I stopped anyone from speaking, but it's just the time and also my damn voice. But I hope I'll see you next week. Or you can write in your things right now to the
Stay and
paper.
talk now.
Huh?
They can stay and talk now.
Oh yeah, there was a potluck dinner.